Okay, thank you. We are now going to start our workshop for today. We'll be talking about the Panther Lake Parks. We have our Parks Director, Brian Levenhagen, and Development Manager, Terry, is it Jungman? Jungman, thank you. We're a little behind schedule, but Brian told me we'll make up for it. So, with that said, all yours, Brian. Thank you.
Council members, it's good to be here. I'm Brian Levenhagen, the Deputy Parks Director, here with Terry Jungman, the Parks Planning and Development Manager. We're here to talk about the Panther Lake Community Park project. Just kind of want to go over what we're going to be talking about over the next half hour or so. First, going to talk a little bit about the background of the Panther Lake annexation and the parks in that area. Then talk about how the Panther Lake Community Park fits into the 2016 Park and Open Space Plan. Then why it makes sense for the Panther Lake Community Park to be Kent's first new park in about 15 years. Then I'll go over the grant strategy for Panther Lake. And then finally, Terry's going to wrap up with the status of the current Panther Lake Community Park project, as well as next steps there. So when Panther Lake was annexed into Kent in 2010, we instantly added 24,000 residents, as well as 5 square miles of land, a big area to add to the city all at once. Kent Parks took over 3 parks at that time from King County. There's a Park Orchard Park, a 6-acre neighborhood park, basically just some walking trails, and at the time a picnic shelter that had to since be removed. But a park with a lot of challenges to develop, not really very much frontage, a park that would require partnering with the school district to renovate. Then Green Tree Park, a 1.5-acre neighborhood park, very small on the neighborhood park scale, but it was a park that we were able to renovate and add additional recreational value to. And then North Meridian Park, 35-acre athletic complex. There's 2 ball fields there, and then mostly just natural area. At the time, right before annexation, park staff realized the deficit of parks in that area. And we went to work to try to find parkland, one for a future community park in Panther Lake, and then the second priority was to find some water access on Panther Lake in the future. So the property we identified to give water access to the lake was the Montnoocy and Van Dyke properties, about a 6.6-acre combined assembled property. It was the last feasible acquisition target on Panther Lake that would actually provide water access to the lake. There is some other open space that you see around that lake, however, it's extremely wet. So this was really the last chance that we had to secure a site for future water access. The state does have a boat launch on the other side of the lake, but it's a very small, constrained site, so it doesn't really have a lot of park potential in the future. This property was acquired with RCO water access grant. You see in the previous picture, Panther Lake was mostly clear of vegetation. That's what it looks like in the winter months of the year. In the summer months, it looks like it does in this area with a ton of vegetation. So in addition to providing that access to the lake, we also envision the site serving as a neighborhood park. About 1 to 2 acres or so of the property would serve that purpose as upland and not encumbered by wetlands or the shoreline setbacks. In the 2016 Park and Open Space Plan, this was identified as one of 3 new neighborhood parks that were part of our strategic projects list. I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up later. While it is important to have access to Panther Lake, it's important to understand that it is slowly turning into a wetland. There's significant water vegetation growth for 6 months out of the year. We have kind of on a high level looked at, is there any way to clean it? Is there any way to remove that vegetation? That would require either mechanical removal, which would be extremely expensive and have a huge impact on the environment as well as being significantly costly, or using herbicides, which also has its own significant environmental impact. So it's really not something that, at least again on a high level, seems feasible. But the lake will provide some nice opportunities for, kayaking, nature viewing, things like that. So it is important that someday we do develop this property. The future Panther Lake Community Park site, the city acquired the Hughes property, which is 33.7 acres. Really, at the time, it was the largest undeveloped property available for acquisition. We were really excited to secure it. It was acquired with WWRP local parks grant money, as well as King County Conservation Futures grant money. You can see the kind of large open grassy area in the middle of the site. That's the portion that would be developed, or a portion of that at least, about 7 or 8 acres or so. But really great site with immediately adjacent to Sioux Creek Trail, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. So, you know, when you're talking about a community park, you immediately may think of active recreation. You know, there's some parks where you have to spend a lot of money to make them a great park. This park is just the opposite. It's already a great park. It's just a beautiful piece of property. We just need to spend some money to give people access to it and get people out there. So the goal is to preserve the natural character of the site. And again, is immediately adjacent to the Sioux Creek Trail. You can see looking south, amazing view of Mount Rainier on clear days. But you can just get a sense of the scale of the property. It really sits up high in the Sioux Creek Valley. You almost feel like you're on a stage, like overlooking the rest of the area. So it feels a lot bigger than it actually is. So you're all familiar with the 2016 Park and Open Space Plan. You've seen this slide previously. But again, that plan was adopted and really had 4 main goals: quality public spaces, a performance-based approach, really taking into account how much recreational value is being added to the system, transformation through reinvestment, reinvesting into our existing parks, and then finding sustainable funding. In that plan, we had planning regions. The East Hill North was kind of, you know, again, the north half of the East Hill. Obviously, Panther Lake annexation area makes up a portion of that. At the time of the plan, but in 2016, East Hill North had about 42,000 residents, whereas the Panther Lake annexation area was somewhere probably around 25 or so. So from here on out through the presentation, you'll hear me talking about East Hill North. That includes Panther Lake. That is kind of the planning unit that we use to look at as we move through the plan. So since the 2016 plan was emphasized, we've made a lot of progress. And I'm not going to go through all these projects, but you know, we've done projects that address large deferred maintenance, the backlog that we had. Done projects to make better use of our existing parks, and we've preserved and enhanced our recreational value. I know you're all familiar with the West Fenwick Park renovations and the Chutes and Ladders Playground. This is something we found out about last week, so I thought it would be a great opportunity just to share. Playworld is the playground manufacturer that we used on this project. They're a national company, one of the leaders. They actually chose the West Fenwick project to feature on their cover, but not just their cover, they also on their back cover, also spread inside the catalog. And what we're really proud of, they actually chose West Fenwick Park as an example of how to build an inclusive playground. So, you know, in a national publication from a leading playground manufacturer, you know, they chose our project to show how to build an inclusive playground. So, you know, huge props to Terry, Brian Higgins, and his team on executing that project so well, and just a really cool honor for the city and a really positive way to be represented. So we've spent a lot of time reinvesting in our parks. You know, that is the right thing to do. It's the most responsible way to move forward. You know, I think if you go back in time and redo the 2016 Park and Open Space Plan, we would still have that emphasis. But what about building new parks? Again, hasn't built a new park since Town Square Plaza in 2008. That was actually my first project when I joined the Parks Planning and Development team. I don't know if I would have believed you if you would have told me that 14 years later it would have been the last new park that we built, but I think here we are, and I think we all understand why. Parks has prioritized getting more recreational value out of our existing parks and replacing failing assets. New parks are really expensive to build. Existing parks already have frontage built, they already have utilities underground. You know, you have to start from scratch when you're building a new park, and that can be significantly more expensive, 2 or 3 more times as expensive in some cases. New parks also take more time to design and permit and do community outreach, so it's a big investment of staff time as well. And the other reality with building new parks is that when you increase the size of your park system, you also need to increase your operating budget at the same time. I know we've had a lot of general fund struggles over the last number of years, and so it is a decision. You either increase your operating budget or you reduce the level of service in the rest of your park system. So it's a big deal to build a new park. So with that, why are we building a new park? Well, The 2016 park plan found that the level of service in the East Hill North region of the city was less than a third of that of the entire city. You can see the table on the right side there. The level of service is a recreational value per 1,000 people. East Hill North is 0.47. Citywide, it's 1.62. So that's a pretty significant deficit. But I think it's important to note that this park deficiency was inherited. It wasn't the burden of the rest of the city of Kent. It wasn't something that city of Kent created. So it's a difficult problem to try and solve. At the same time, King County City Health Report shows that Kenny still ranks towards the bottom compared to the rest of the King County in many indicators of public health, including physical activity limitations, poor health, and high levels of mental distress. The East Hill North region of the city has 7 elementary schools plus the new Kent Laboratory Academy in the area. There's tons of kids. Those kids need quality parklands. You can see down the bottom right the new playground that was just built at the Kent Laboratory Academy. Really nice playfield and playground and sports courts. Which can be part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. Always have the trouble of whether or not those grounds are open after hours or not. But certainly something that we're going to continue to try to work with the school district on. The 2020 to 2028 Comprehensive Rec Program Plan found that people want programming opportunities closer to their homes. But I think really when you look at the whole plan, it would only make the whole park plan and kind of our approach, it would only really make sense to build a new park if we could build it with a significant portion of the funding coming from outside of Kent. It wasn't a Kent-created problem, so how do we find ways to leverage county, state, and even maybe federal funding to build a park? And really, East Hill North does not have a community park, which is a pretty big deal. So what's the difference between a community park and a neighborhood park? Well, first size. Community parks are typically 10 to 25 acres or more, whereas neighborhood parks are 5 to 10 acres. In our system, we have a number of neighborhood parks that are smaller than that, but really we try to maximize them, get the most recreational value we can out of them. Service area for a community park is roughly a 10-minute drive, so certainly this would cover all of the East Hill North region. And then for a neighborhood park, it's a little tougher. We've talked a lot about this as we're moving through the park and open space plan, trying to kind of land on something. Right now we're kind of thinking about a 15-minute walk. And it's easy to draw a circle on a map and say, well, if people can walk within 15 minutes to a park, then they're served by that neighborhood park. But the reality is if people don't choose to walk there, it doesn't really matter. So I know the new TMP has made significant strides trying to place more focus on walkability, but I think the reality is lots of Kent still isn't very walkable. So it's still kind of a work in progress, something that we're going to continue to try to work towards. So community parks, we have 7 in Kent. We have 22 neighborhood parks in Kent. But we have 0 community parks in the East Hill North region, whereas we have 5 and 5 neighborhood parks in the same area. And then programming, typically you'll have programming at a community park because it's more set up to support that programming, whereas in neighborhood parks you typically wouldn't. Not to say you wouldn't have exceptions to that rule, but generally you stick to community parks for programming. So comparing the two properties, Hughes property and the Montanusi property, Hughes is a community park. The potential recreational value there is 17.75, which is pretty high in our system. 33.7 acres. The surface area covers the entire East Hill North region. And again, because it serves more people and has more recreational value, a greater ability to leverage outside funds. The Montanusi property is just 6 acres, 9.5 points of potential recreational value. About half of that's tied to the water access component. Service area is about 0.75 mile radius, which is about what that 15-minute walk designation means. And, less attractive for grants. It doesn't mean it couldn't get grants, but just less attractive, just because it serves fewer people.
Brian, quick point of clarity. Is that the Van Dyke Montanusi? You're including both parcels?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Van Dyke properties were like the frontage of the Montanusi property, so he added 1 acre, and so.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have made that clear.
Councilman Rochelle, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Council President. Brian, can you explain a little bit more why it's less attractive for grants? I understand because it's smaller, but you could argue that this is also in an area where you have people who
Lower income.
lower income, more diverse.
Well, and certainly that's true as well. But again, when you're looking at a community park that's serving 42,000 people versus a neighborhood park that's serving a smaller number, it's just the number of, again, a factor of the number of people that it's serving. It's smaller. You're not going to get as much park for the investment. Is that so?
Okay, so the people who give you the grants are more concerned about how many people are going to be served rather than equity issues?
Well, I mean, you're serving the same people. The community park is serving whole East Hill
Okay.
as well. So, you know. So again, why the Hughes property and not the Montnoocy property? Community park should take some pressure off of the existing neighborhood parks in the area of the city. We've seen over the last number of years a lot more larger gatherings in our smaller parks. Part of this is just people don't have larger parks to come to and gather and use for family get-togethers and whatnot. Hughes property has regional trail access, not just the Sioux Creek Trail, but also it's a short walk up to the Lake Youngs Trail. For example, the Hughes property is 3.5 miles from Lake Meridian Park, so you can imagine a nice little daily bike trip from one park to the other. Just strengthens our park system and gives people more opportunities for how to recreate. Partnership potentials, the Friends of Sioux Creek and King County Parks have both indicated a willingness to partner with us, or an excitement over the potential possibility too in the future. Community Park has the potential for programming and revenue. You have a rec program plan indicated a need for a nature programming wing in the rec division. So this is a great site that would lend itself towards that type of programming with nature and birding at walks and things like that. Potential for exercise classes, a rentable picnic shelter, small events, whether that's birthday parties. You know, it's such a beautiful site. I could even see people having weddings out here. And then summer day camps. You know, you do nature-themed summer day camps. Day camps are a really important part of keeping kids active and busy, and also childcare in the summer months. I mentioned before, Montnoocy is one of 3 new neighborhood parks listed in the 2016 plan, Park and Open Space Plan. The other 2 are West Hill Park and 132nd Avenue property. Both of those were acquired in the mid-90s. Both were actively in the planning stages when the Great Recession hit. And so both of them are projects that we continue to get phone calls about and emails occasionally. So it's one of the things we want to look at in the new park plan update is, you know, how do we look at getting these parks built? What does that, you know, what's feasible? And how do we prioritize those parks? And really, at the end of the day, opportunities to build new parks are rare. And if we can only add one new park in the next 15 years, Hughes would have the biggest impact. We talked about the Hughes property having the biggest bang for the buck, a larger service area, a higher potential recreational value. So, you know, even if we develop the park to a certain degree initially, there's still more opportunity to come back later and add additional amenities and things like that. City of Covington recently got $7 million from the state for phase 2 of the Covington Community Park. That was Covington's first community park. It was a big deal. Covington's population in 2019 is around 21,000 people, which is smaller than the population of Panther Lake. So when we went to make the grant application, we gave it the name of Panther Lake Community Park to draw attention to the fact that, you know, this area is the size of a small city. It is a, you know, community, it's a neighborhood. People have a sense of identity with Panther Lake. And so we wanted to make sure to draw that parallel. We've had that conversation on the importance of kind of finding a way to fill in that gap in recreational value in the Panther Lake area with legislators from the 47th and 11th district. So I know it's been really important to a lot of people for a long time. So at the end of the day, you know, again, our priority is to reinvest in our existing parks. So the Panther Lake Community Park project was dependent on outside funding sources to move forward. So it was vital that we got those leveraged funds in order to be able to be in a position to build a new park. So what grant funding is available? We submitted the request with the state for $3 million to build the Panther Lake Community Park. We received $2 million. That grant is specifically tied to the Hughes property. And then we got an additional $1 million through a budget request for ARPA funds, and then another $1 million from City Capital Resources Fund. So currently the budget sits at around $4 million, a little less than that because the state takes administrative fees outside of those grants. But we do feel like the project's in a good position to also apply for a WWRP Local Parks grant through the RCO this coming spring, which could potentially add another $500,000. There's a potential to apply for LWCF grant, which is a federal grant that's administered by the RCO. The RCO is currently looking at evaluating raising the max grant award to $1 to $2 million due to increases in federal funding. So that's an exciting opportunity. Historically, this grant is a grant program that only awarded somewhere between 1 and 4 projects a year, and then you add the burden of dealing with federal strings that come with that money. It hasn't been a very attractive candidate for the amount of time you have to spend on the application, but it's certainly a different opportunity now that the maximum reward is potentially going up. And then King County grants. The King County Parks Levy has a new grant program associated with it. The $500,000 max. Obviously, the adjacency with the Sioux Creek Trail makes this a really attractive candidate. So, I think conservatively, we're hoping the budget for the project's around $4.5 million when all is said and done, but it could potentially be even higher than that. So,
We got a question from Councilmember Lumber, please.
Yeah, thank you. So Brian, help me understand the math here. So we need $4 million to build it. We received $2 million from the state,
yep.
$1 million from capital
Yep.
resources of our own, and $1 million from ARPA. So why would we continue to go after grant money for this particular endeavor versus something that is more equitable?
It's a good question. So one, I think I mentioned before, new parks are really expensive to build, especially a community park. There's going to be a lot of challenges, again, with frontage, with the utilities and things like that. But building parks isn't getting any cheaper, and the more you can build at once, the farther your dollar goes, and the sooner the community gets to benefit from that. So, we don't have a set budget because we're really just starting the planning process. But I think as the community tells us what they want, and we try to start putting the project together, it is likely that $4 million would be a first phase, and then again, moving forward, we can go from there. So,
I think there's an administration fee coming off that too, though, right? The grant.
Yeah, there is. But parks are it's a qualitative thing, right? I mean, you get what you invest in it. So,
Okay.
So, any other questions for me before I hand it over to Terry?
Yeah, actually, but
Get more? You light on?
I'll wait my turn.
Okay, Councilmember Troutner, go ahead, please.
I just want to recognize that I think it was a couple years ago, back in February, Councilmember Core, Mayor Ralph, and myself all went down to Olympia to meet with legislators because this project was on our legislative priority list. And so, throughout time, legislators recognize the importance of what this can provide for our community. And I think it meets that criteria that you talk about. So I understand where there's, needs in other areas, but, this specific money we asked for to have for this particular location because it meets that criteria. So I'm just happy to see that there's finally some attainable goals that we're going to actually get there. So thank you.
Yeah, so, I think, this is probably partly, this is on me for not understanding. I live in that area when you say Panther Lake, and we have 2 properties adjacent to Panther Lake, and we're going to Olympia, and we're applying ARPA funds for a Panther Lake community park. I'm not thinking the Hughes property that is along Sioux Creek. 2016 was before my time, so this one caught me by surprise. I'm not opposed to spending the money we've secured, but I do think that there is, if you go back to some of the maps, there's a huge swath of what I consider the Panther Lake community that remains underserved. And that is typically the residents that would be better, that would need the recreational needs based on, diversity and health issues. And I just feel like we're missing out on serving a large swath of our residents. I know exactly where this is. I also know it's very near the 2 playgrounds that my kids play at that are associated with the school district, the two schools between Sunrise and Sue's Creek. There's Gary Grant Park that we haven't talked about. It's a King County community park, or maybe it'd meet the neighborhood park standards, but it's there at the trailhead. So it just seems to me that I think if I'd realized what we were talking about, this would not have been my priority. It would have been building out a neighborhood park adjacent to the actual Panther Lake. So, but again, I mean, we've secured $4 million for it, so I'm not opposed to spending that. But I am a little dubious of prioritizing any additional spending for this. So that's just my statement.
And absolutely agree, there's a huge amount of need in the Panther Lake area, in the East Hill North region as a whole. And really, if you do the math, if we fully develop every property we own in that area, we still have a deficiency in rec value in that area of the city. So, that deficit is something that we're going to be digging out of for a long time. Certainly we need to develop the Montnoocy property. Absolutely. There's a ton of need there. It'll be a great park someday. So, but yeah, you have to start somewhere, and just the lack of a community park in that area of the city is a glaring need, and it again just provides the biggest opportunity to add recreational value to the area of the city, and so.
And I guess my only comment, as Brian and team, is, I wouldn't want to cut any shortcuts on this here. I mean, because you get out what you put into it, right? So we got an opportunity to make this one of the best. I want us to be able to get all the resources possible and try to make this a really nice park for everybody, right? Not try to cut it off and shorten things. My thoughts and recommendation and come down to the vote what it may be. I want to make this the best of the best, and whatever fun we can get to make it the best, then that's what we should do. There's a lot of need out there. We all understand that, and we only can do so much at a time, but this is what we have in front of us now, and I want it to be a premier when we get through with it. So, thank you. Okay. Councilmember Michelle.
Thank you, Council President. Brian, as part of the new Parks and Open Space Plan, Montnoocy will be on a list of future projects. And will there be prioritized lists as part of the Open Space Plan?
We haven't gotten that far. I think it's something that we have some really exciting things to share with you next month at a workshop regarding the Park and Open Space Plan. We have some better mapping abilities that really look at weighing things like equity and all the other ways that we can make sure that we're serving the people who need the most. So it's there will be more to come on that, and so
there will be prioritized project lists as part of the Parks and Open Space Plan.
I don't know if we
Yeah, I can.
Maybe,
jump
possibly.
in.
So, yeah, I would say that there will be a list of projects. I don't know that we would necessarily put them in order, one region versus another. That feels slippery, but I think we would sort of set high priorities within each of those regions of those projects that we know need to move forward to serve the sort of the greatest and biggest need of the communities we serve. But I think I don't know that we would say, okay, it's a list 1 to 10, and those are the projects that we're going to do in that order. I think it's a little bit more of a nuance in how you analyze that, where grant opportunities exist, and how these projects can move forward. I think it's clear to me that in looking at some of the information that's coming out of this process, that the Northeast Hill region is one of our highest need areas, generally speaking. And so I don't think it's any newsflash to anyone that the Montnoocy property would likely be at the top of that list for that region. I think that's a very clear priority. It's just a matter of funding, and I think that the what needs to be discussed in the context of all this is building new parks requires new operation and maintenance resources in order to do it. So every time we take one of these new parks on, we need to make sure that we're putting either, like Brian said, either reducing the level of service broadly across the city or adding the necessary O&M to meet that increased user demand.
All right, good segue then. Any other questions for me before I pass the baton? All right, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, Council President, Council members, Terry Jungman, Park Planning and Development Manager, thanks for having me here tonight. Appreciate the time. to talk about this project. I just wanted to add a little bit about the project budget because I think it's an important topic as we talk about the amount of funding available to the Panther Lake Community Park project. $4 million is the budget that's been set now, but we haven't gone through a public engagement process. We don't know precisely what's going to be built at this site yet, so we have that number kind of in mind as we move through that process and understand more about the site and the constraints that I'll talk about here in a moment. It very well could be that that price goes up based on what we know we need to build or what that public process tells us that we need to do. So we want to keep our options open about pursuing additional grant funding for this site so that we can meet whatever need comes out of that process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what active projects we have in the East Hill North region. I also wanted to start by saying, and we've kind of talked about this already, that the 2022 Parks and Open Space Plan is very likely to change the priorities that we have. You know, I could anticipate that 6-year plan being adjusted next year in the next budget cycle to adapt to those changes in priorities. And so the priorities that we have up here today are really just the ones that are in process right now. So we have a construction project that's moving ahead up at Chestnut Ridge. You can see the photos here to the right. That's a holistic park renovation project dealing with outdated children's play equipment, pathway, ADA accessibility issues that we know we have there, and adding some new and interesting recreational features to the site, hillside stairs, and some additional play features. And so that's an exciting project that's out to bid right now. Actually, we had pre-bid conference this morning and looking forward to moving forward with construction on that project here in the spring, summer of 2022. The other project we have in motion as far as neighborhood parks is concerned is the Garrison Creek Park renovation. You'll recall that site is one where we have a Public Works owned water reservoir facility and sport courts directly on top of that water reservoir. Those sport courts are failing miserably at this point. We can't seem to keep any sort of sport surfacing intact on top of that. So we're going to be moving through a process with our consultant to better understand what kind of different services we can apply to it to regain that space to add some recreational value to it. We'll also be looking at children's play, connection down to Garrison Creek, nature play, and so forth. And then the other project we have is the community park at Panther Lake. That's what we're here discussing today. That RFQ process is underway. We'll talk about that here with a little bit more detail. So overview of this project for the community park at Panther Lake. We wanted to start this project by setting some high-level goals that would really be sort of the guiding principles for us as we move forward with the project. So we'll kind of go through those. First goal is to create a vision for this community park that meets the needs of current and future residents. What we know about this area of the city is it's one of the highest potential sites for redevelopment. It's the character of those properties is typically more rural or suburban. So a lot of this is going to be, subdivided and density is going to be increased over time. And so as we move through that master planning process, we want to make sure that we're looking at the needs of people who live there today, but anticipating that growth and that future need. And so we want to leave space within that master plan for it to be adapted in the next 10 years, as we know the population is going to change pretty dramatically up there. Preserve the existing natural character of the landscape while creating a space for people. This is probably the most delicate balancing act that we have on this project. The greatest feature of the Hughes property is its natural characteristics. We don't want to do anything in the course of this project to dramatically change that. But what we do need to do is to give people access to it. Right now, it is essentially walled off from the public and people can't really get to it. And so we need to create that basic infrastructure, that access in order to get people there so that it'd be a usable space. Improve connections to the regional trail system. Brian hinted at this, but we've got massive opportunities in regards to the Seuss Creek Trail, 150,000 people that move through that trail corridor every single year. And then also just up the hill to 16th, we want to make connections to the Lake Young's Loop Trail. We've already been in conversations with King County Parks and Trails, their group, on developing a partnership between this project and those two adjacent regional trail systems. They are very excited about this project and seeing it move ahead, and so we're going to continue to foster that partnership with King County as we move forward. Set a higher standard for sustainability and resiliency best practices on city projects. This is a personal goal that I've set for this project, of really looking to raise the bar as it relates to sustainability and resiliency for city projects. There's really a big opportunity for us to look at our projects differently and to set an example for the kind of excellence that we can expect from large-scale park projects like this. We think that this is potentially a good candidate for sites accreditation process. It's something we've already started to explore with our own staff. Sites is the lead certification for parks and landscapes, and so is, again, high standards for sustainability for a park site and innovation. So that's something we're going to be looking at and really seeing this as an example. Looking at the proposed scope of work, I think we should start by saying that the public process will really tell us what the scope of work should be, but we have some ideas of what we think would be some good basic infrastructure to get installed there. So things like parking, utilities, a restroom facility. These are all very much characteristic of a community park. Children's play area, something that we feel is important, but again, children's play, that would be something that would be contextual to the site. I'm not imagining things like bright colored play equipment, but things that are more natural and blend in with the landscape, things that are more on the scale of nature play. Nature trails and loop paths that would typically be of a soft surface nature. Trail connectivity to the Seuss Creek and Lake Young's regional trail system. If you're familiar with the property, there's an existing arena structure that's a remnant of the prior ownership of the property. We believe that that structure is in good condition, actually, and we think that there's an opportunity for some adaptive reuse of that facility. So that's something we'll be studying with our consultant, structural engineer, and architectural team that will be brought on board. We know because of the nature of the transportation system 132nd and 216th that there's likely to be some degree of site frontage improvements required in order to get basic access onto the site. So that is something that we are going to have to take a look at and work with our partners in Public Works on. And then, like I said, other ideas that come out of a public engagement process. Design considerations and opportunities. So, we know that this site is relatively constrained. I think that this site, when we look at it compared to the Montnewsey property, there's equal constraints on both sides. So, looking at what we have here on the right-hand side, and just for reference, this is a early concept plan that was produced back in 2010, and it was simply put together to proceed with the grant application for the land acquisition. So this is really just a diagram for us to talk to. It really doesn't have any indication on what we're going to be doing through the master planning process. I don't want to mislead anybody to say that this is the plan. Nope, we're going to be hitting the reset button on this thing and starting from scratch as far as the master plan is concerned. But anyways, for the purposes of this discussion, we know that the formal development of the park site is likely to be along the northern edge of the property, adjacent to the 216th Street. The reasons for this is because we really want to keep that formal park development contained within a certain area so that we don't allow that to sort of come in further into the property and start to change the natural character of it, right? Keep the formal space tight to 216th, keep development limited, really look to promote that natural character as much as possible. So things like parking, shelter, children's play, those types of facilities would be on that northern edge. And there's lots of reasons why you would do that. The natural character is one, but I think cost of running utility lines, there's just a lot of logic behind keeping that very much on the 216th Street side. We've got the BPA power line easement that runs sort of from the northwest corner down to the southeast corner. You can kind of see some faint yellow lines through there. So that's a constraint on the site. That site is completely covered in blackberry and is considered a wetland, and so very much a challenge for us to do anything with that corridor, but we're going to be in conversations with BPA about how to do some invasive species management practices on there to create better trail connectivity, some loop trail opportunities through there. We know that they're going to need that access for their maintenance reasons, but also promotes better trail connectivity, both north-south and east-west through the site. Like I said, the plateau area that you see there in the center that's kind of labeled open play field, that's sort of the high point of the site, this plateau prairie space. It's saddled with wetlands on both sides, so we know that that's going to be a constraint. That's something that we're going to be studying through the design process and understanding, wetland delineation and buffers and really keeping ourselves out of those areas so that we don't cause any impacts to those sensitive areas. And then, as I said, there are pockets of invasive species, primarily through that power line easement, but there's also some knotweed as well in various places. So some of the strategies for us to minimize development of the site, I think I saw a question. You want me to pause for a moment?
Councilman Lumber, yes.
Yeah, just looking at the map here, and also looking at the aerial view, I mean, obviously, all the residential the homes, all the residents are on the west side of 132nd. So what improvements or what plans would we have? I mean, I guess I'm concerned about creating like unsafe crossing if kids are going to go to try to play. Like, what do we do in those situations where?
Yeah, so step one is we get our consultant team on board, and then we immediately sit down with Public Works before we get too deep into this project to understand exactly how we can work with them to promote better. I think there's an opportunity to promote pedestrian and bike access to the facility.
Yeah, because that
130
stretch of street right there is not pedestrian friendly at all.
Exactly. So as I've understood through the TMP process, there are certain areas of the city that are not quite up to speed as far as pedestrian connectivity is concerned. So I think we understand the limitations of that. We want to try and make those improvements to promote that wherever possible. But because this is a community park, we're really seeing it as being a place where people are likely going to drive to get to it. And so there's two ways. I think we need to promote bike and pedestrian connectivity to the space, but we also need to be looking at, vehicular means of getting to the park. So that could be intersection improvements. There could be some change to 132nd corridor. I don't know what those things are, but I think the point is let's meet with Public Works early to understand what improvements need to be made and make sure that we're on the same page about who's doing what in order to tee us up for success on this project.
Okay, thank you.
So thinking through all these site constraints, what we know we need to do is to employ some low-impact development strategies on this site, so LID strategies. So just listing out a few of these, and this will evolve as we go through the design process, but to work within the existing hydrology of the site, we don't want to go in and change the grading. We don't want to change the topography of the site. The natural character needs to be preserved. So we want to map and understand what that hydrology is and then work within those constraints. Minimizing impervious cover. We really have an opportunity to employ some strategies that we haven't used as much on other projects, but contextually I think it makes sense here. So looking at things like pervious pavement wherever possible, and really promoting more soft surface trails as opposed to hard surface trails here will help us keep that impervious cover count as low as possible in order to limit the amount of stormwater infrastructure that we're having to build on site. So we know that we're going to have to do some amount of stormwater infrastructure to get this project built. The types of stormwater infrastructure we do should be green. What I'm talking about here would be things like bioswales and rain gardens. Really the goal of doing GSI on a park space, it would be such that as you move through these spaces and in the stormwater infrastructure surrounding you, you really wouldn't be able to tell where that GSI stops and starts with the rest of the park. So this all has to do with plant palette selection and how it gets integrated into the landscape. We've seen some excellent examples from our consultant community that have submitted, and I think we will be able to achieve that on this site. And then the last thing to say is that we really have a unique place here. We have sort of these three distinct ecosystems that exist already within this park. You have sort of this upland prairie space. Obviously, we've got the wetlands on both sides, and then we've got some forested area as well. What we really want to do is accentuate those three ecosystems and create an education opportunity and get people into those spaces without disturbing that natural character, without creating any environmental disturbance, but then be able to get people there, create an educational opportunity, and build that stewardship that doesn't exist for these places today. Our engagement plan moving forward on this project, this is a community park. We would really employ every strategy that we have in terms of getting people connected to this project and talking to us on it. So kind of listed out our outreach efforts. I don't have to go through each one of these, but we would have our online presence. We would have all the flyers and posters and mailers. We would have signage in the park. We would have signage on Sioux Creek Trail. We've got a captive audience there of recreational trail users who are some of the most likely candidates to use the Hughes property space. Sending things out through our newsletters, social media, and then really I think there's an opportunity to develop a closer partnership with the Kent School District with all the various school sites that exist within proximity here, utilizing Peach Jar, but really working with those principals and developing some activities that can be really targeted at youth and getting them engaged in the design process. I think that's a missing component to our design process today, is really getting youth engaged early in these projects and having their voices heard. So we really want to take the opportunity to do that, and then obviously presenting these things through our Kent's Parks and Recreation Commission as well. So we'll have various engagement opportunities through the project, our online. We'll meet with the local community, kind of develop this narrative of site history, both the short-term history that's happened in the last, 60, 70 years, but also looking beyond that and looking at tribal migration and working with tribes who have an interest in this property to also have that storytelling occur on site. That narrative is complex, and we recognize that. Having pop-up events along Sioux Creek Trail, again, I think that that's going to be a great way for us to get people engaged in this project because there's so many users that move through that space every day, especially in the spring and summer months. Traditional public meetings, we'll kind of have to see what goes on with Omicron and COVID and so forth, but we really see an opportunity by hosting these meetings this summer that we can be outdoors and in public and meeting with people in person. We're finding that people are interested and engaged and wanting to do that sort of thing. And then really having a road show that we can take to organizations that may not have time to come meet us in our setting, to have a space where we can go and meet with them on their time and really bring that participation in the project to them so that it's not a burden on them to have to come and participate in our meeting. So that's something we're looking to do more and more of with our community-based organizations. And this is the last slide here. So this is just a description of the process that we've moved through so far. So we advertised this project. We had a competitive request for qualifications process. This was posted back in November for the Panther Lake Community Park project. I was floored by the response that we've had from the consultant community on this project. We had 10 different consultants interested in this project. These are some of the top consultants in the region that are interested in coming to Kent to work on this project. And so really an impressive portfolio of submissions that came in, and we really couldn't go wrong. We had shortlisted it to 4 firms that we interviewed over the past week, and we are working towards selection of a final candidate. And so once we have that final candidate selected, we would then move through a negotiation of contract, scope and fee proposal, and then work towards a kickoff of the project sometime in late February or early March. The overall project timeline, our goal is to have a master plan process this summer. Then we would move into the design phase for design development construction drawings in the fall of winter of 2022. Permitting and bidding in the spring of 23, with the goal of being under construction on phase 1, what I'm calling phase 1, which would really just be those phases that are sort of outlined within that master plan process, very likely to be done over multiple phases. But the goal would be under construction in the summer of 2023. So this is an ambitious timeline. I kind of want to recognize that. You can see my footnote there that construction of phase 1 is really dependent upon no big delays in engagement or the permitting phases. We know that these engagement processes are sensitive, and if it requires more conversation, that's what we'll have to do. And so I just want to recognize that we're going to take our time with this project, and we want to do it right, as Council President Boyce has stated. And so it's possible that could extend past the summer of 23. We'll keep the council updated on this project as it moves ahead. So that's it for the presentation. Brian and I'm sure, can answer questions if you all have any.
First of all, I want to say, hey, great presentation. I'm not surprised you have lots of consultants lined up to do this year. I mean, this could be really phenomenal. So thank you both for sharing it with us. There's a lot of questions along the way. There may be still other questions, and we'll start with Councilmember Michaud, please.
I'd like to go last.
Huh?
I'd like to go.
Oh, I'm sorry. How about Councilmember Limer?
Yeah, just a couple follow-up questions. This might be for Brian or Terry, I'm not sure which. So you talked about the mechanical removal at Panther Lake, and that being expensive. Do we have an idea how expensive?
No, we don't. That was something that I asked a question about because I got a request from a citizen to look into it. So
Yeah.
I had a very brief conversation with Mike Tudis on that, and so we have not looked into it in any level of detail.
Okay, and is it fair to say that, some of our other property, like Lake Fenwick, had we not, if it had just been left to be, we've had to add aeration and stuff to keep vegetation down. So is it fair to say that it's really, it's kind of like in no different condition than if we had found it, like if we started with Lake Fenwick?
So, I'm not an expert in hydrology and the kind of life cycle of lakes. It's my understanding that Panther Lake is kind of on the last stage of successionary life as a lake. It's so like kind of as it fills in with nutrients and everything else, that's when these depressions turn into wetlands. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but it's my understanding that this is just a natural progression of that lake.
Okay.
And I do not Well, yeah, I'll just say that.
Okay.
I'm not an expert, so.
Any other question? Councilman Michaud?
Yes, thank you, Council President. Thank you, Brian and Terry, for your presentation. I just want to remind everyone that this is a community park, so it is meant to serve many people. We know that the Matanhusi property is much smaller, and while people could get to it by walking or riding their bike, the point of a community park is to bring lots of people in. It's like Lake Meridian. It's kind of the jewel of our system.
Yep.
And I think it's important to know that the Parks Department has not had an opportunity since 2008 to build a park from scratch. We've seen renovations like Wilson Playfields and the renowned West Fenwick Park, and we've seen that they can do a really amazing job. So I think that we just need to have faith in Brian and Terry and Julie, that they will honor our wishes and whatever comes up in public comment. And something that hasn't, well, Terry talked about a little bit, but Julie and Brian know how much I care about the environmental issues and preserving the wildlife habitat and the way that the park looks now as it is. And so I think it's important to remember that one of the goals here is to preserve the natural character of the site. And I did have a meeting with Brian and Julie. We talked a lot about this, and I think that we just have to trust them. I was super concerned about how this was going to be developed. But after, Terry gave you guys a presentation just now showing us how it's going to be developed. And it's really sticking to the natural way that it is now. So I think we're all on the same page. And what really convinced me in the end, sorry, Brian and Terry, was Julie saying to me that she promised me that she won't let me down. And so that means a lot. Like, I don't make open promises to people. I don't, but Julie made that promise to me. And so I'm going to trust her. And so I think that's just what we need to do.
Well said, Councilman Michaud. And I think the thing about Julie and her team has done a lot of quality work on our parts. And, I think for someone to be in the profession, they're very passionate about it, right? So I know we sometimes, it's all about priorities, right? Because like me, I like to have it all at once, right? And we can't do that, right? So I'm willing to go along with it, sure. I mean, I think we'll go through that public process. We'll learn a lot. But I think the end game, this is going to be great for the community, So I'm just excited about it. So, and nothing else from you? Okay. Yeah. Don't take that the bad way, okay? Okay. Thank you. We'll adjourn. All righty. Thank you.